The silk tie felt like a noose, but Julian Thorne wore it like a crown. Maya stood on her tiptoes, smoothing the sapphire blue fabric against his crisp white collar. Around them, the penthouse apartment smelled of expensive espresso and the metallic tang of Chicago's winter air. "The speech is on your iPad, Julian," Maya said, her voice steady despite the 3 hours of sleep she'd managed. "I highlighted the cues for the jokes. Don't rush the transition when you mention the Clean Water Initiative. Let the silence hang for a beat. Let them feel your passion." Julian smiled, that practiced, boyish grin that had graced the cover of Forbes last month. He cupped her cheek, his thumb skimming her jawline. "What would I do without you, Maya? You're the engine that keeps the Thorne empire running." "I'm just the brand strategist, Julian," she demurred, though they both knew better. She was the one who translated his erratic ideas into coherent business plans. She was the one who managed the fallout when he offended investors. She was the one currently navigating the logistical nightmare of their upcoming $200,000 wedding of the century. "You're my soon-to-be wife," he corrected, checking his reflection one last time. "And tonight's gala is the final hurdle before the IPO. Make sure my godfather, Arthur, is seated at the head table. We need his final sign-off on the bridge loan before the wedding." "I've already handled it." He kissed her forehead, a dry, distracted gesture, and swept out the door, followed by a wake of expensive cologne and the frantic clicking of his assistant's heels. Maya sank onto the velvet sofa, her eyes burning. Her wedding dress, a custom Vera Wang, sat in a garment bag in the guest room. It was beautiful, white, and suffocating. She felt like a ghost in her own life, a behind-the-scenes miracle worker who had spent 5 years polishing a stone until it looked like a diamond. By 8 p.m., Maya was back at the Thorne Ventures headquarters. She'd realized halfway home that she'd left her personal phone, the one containing the encrypted guest list and the seating chart for the gala, on the charging dock in Julian's private office suite. The building was mostly dark, the glass and steel structure reflecting the shimmering lights of the Chicago skyline. The cleaning crew was on the lower floors, leaving the executive level eerily silent. She stepped out of the elevator and headed toward the glass-walled conference room that adjoined Julian's office. She stopped. The lights were dimmed, but the glow of a laptop screen illuminated 2 figures. Julian was there, and so was Elena, the 24-year-old head of social media Maya had hired 6 months earlier. Elena wasn't looking at a screen. She was sitting on the edge of the mahogany table, her legs wrapped around Julian's waist. Maya's breath hitched. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her wedding ring, a 4-carat emerald cut, felt suddenly heavy, like lead. She expected to feel a surge of rage, a desire to scream, but then Julian spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the cracked door. "God, I'm exhausted," Julian groaned, his head buried in Elena's neck. "Between the IPO prep and playing the doting fiancé, I feel like I'm performing 24/7. Elena laughed, a sharp, tinkling sound. "Poor Julian, having to go home to the Great Wall of Boring. How much longer do you have to keep up the charade?" 2 weeks, Julian said, pulling back to look at her. "Just until the wedding. The moment the vows are exchanged and Arthur's investment is locked into the trust, the Thorne-Vance power couple image will have served its purpose. I've already got the post-nuptial NDA drafted." "And Elena?" asked Julian, tracing his lip with a finger. "Does Maya suspect anything?" Julian let out a cold, dismissive chuckle. "Maya? Please. She's too busy color-coding the floral arrangements to notice what's happening right under her nose. She's a brilliant worker bee, Elena, but she has no spark. She's the beige paint on the wall. I need her for the IPO, but after that, I'm moving her to a satellite office in London. Out of sight, out of mind." Maya stood frozen in the hallway. The world didn't tilt, it didn't shatter. Instead, it became incredibly, terrifyingly clear. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling, but not with grief. It was the thrill of a sudden, icy clarity. She had built this man. She had written his words, crafted his charm, and curated his perfect soul. He thought she was the beige paint? Fine. She watched through the glass for a moment longer as Julian kissed the woman who had replaced her. He looked like a prince, but Maya knew exactly how the stage was built, and she knew which floorboards were rotten. She didn't storm in. She didn't cry. Instead, she turned around and walked silently back to the elevator. As the doors slid shut, Maya pulled out her phone. She didn't call a lawyer. She didn't call her mother. She opened her contacts and scrolled until she found a name she hadn't spoken to in 3 years. Leo Sterling. Julian's former partner, the man Julian had cheated out of his shares and branded as unstable to the press, the man who actually knew where the bodies were buried. Maya took a deep breath, the cold weight in her chest settling into a hard, sharp edge. "Julian," she whispered to the empty elevator, "you should have remembered, I'm the one who handles the PR." The bar was called the Rusty Anchor, a dive tucked away in a corner of industrial Chicago where the scent of diesel and deep fryer grease hung heavy in the air. It was a world away from the marble floors of Julian's penthouse. Leo Sterling sat in a corner booth, a half-empty glass of dark whiskey in front of him. He looked different from the photos Maya had scrubbed from the internet 3 years ago. His hair was longer, his face etched with the weariness of a man who had been through the ringer and stopped caring about the press. When Maya slid into the booth opposite him, he didn't even look up. "You're late, Maya. Or maybe you're 3 years early. I can't remember which." "I'm here now, Leo," she said, her voice cutting through the jukebox's low hum. Leo looked up then, his gray eyes sharp and cynical. "Does the golden boy know you're in a place that serves beer in cans? Or are you here to offer me a hush money check to stop me from telling the Tribune what really happened to the clean water source code?" Maya didn't flinch. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it across the sticky table. "I'm not here to silence you. I'm here to give you the keys to the vault." Leo frowned, opening the envelope. His expression shifted from cynicism to stunned disbelief as he scanned the documents. They were internal server logs, the ones Julian thought he'd wiped. They proved that Thorne Ventures' flagship software was built on a skeleton of Leo's original, stolen algorithms. "Why?" Leo whispered. "You're marrying him in 10 days." "I'm not marrying him," she said, her voice like cold steel. "I'm dismantling him. He thinks I'm the beige paint on his walls. He thinks I'm too busy choosing peonies to notice he's sleeping with the social media girl and planning to dump me the day after the IPO." Leo leaned back, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. He always did underestimate the people who actually did the work. "What do you need from me?" "The rest of the puzzle," she said. "The offshore accounts he used to hide the embezzlement during the seed round. I know they exist, but I need the signatures." "I have them," Leo said, his voice dropping an octave. "But Maya, if you do this, you're not just breaking a heart, you're nuking a multi-billion-dollar company. You'll be in the fallout zone." "I built the zone," Maya replied, her eyes flashing. "I know exactly where the lead-lined bunkers are." The next week was a masterclass in psychological warfare. By day, Maya was the perfect bride-to-be. She sat through 4-hour seating chart meetings with Julian's mother, nodding at swatches of eggshell versus ivory. She sat on Julian's lap during investor dinners, laughing at his tired jokes while she secretly used her phone under the table to transfer funds from their wedding savings account into a private LLC she'd registered in Delaware. She felt a strange, intoxicating rush every time she looked at Julian. He would kiss her, smelling of Elena's perfume, and tell her how vital she was. "I am vital," she thought, watching him sleep at night while she sat in the dark of the guest room, her laptop screen reflecting in her eyes. "I'm the one holding your entire reality together, and I'm about to let go." The internal glow-up was subtle. She stopped wearing the muted pastels Julian preferred, opting for sharp, tailored silhouettes in black and charcoal. She spoke less, but when she did, her words were surgical. Julian was too blinded by his own ego to see the transformation. He just thought she was stressed about the wedding. The midpoint of the plan arrived at the IPO launch gala. The ballroom was a sea of tuxedos and silk. Julian was the man of the hour, standing on a stage beneath a giant projection of the Thorne Ventures logo. Maya stood off to the side, watching as Elena, wearing a dress that was far too tight for a staff member, stood in the front row, beaming up at him. And finally, Julian said into the microphone, his voice dripping with practiced sincerity, "To my beautiful fiancé, Maya, the woman behind the man. Without her, none of this would be possible." The room erupted in applause. Julian beckoned her up. As she walked toward him, she caught Leo's eye in the back of the room. He was dressed as a waiter, a tray of champagne in his hand. He gave her a single, barely perceptible nod. Julian pulled her close, his hand resting heavy on her waist. "You look beautiful, Beige," he whispered into her ear, so low only she could hear. "Just keep smiling, we're almost there." Maya smiled. It was the most honest smile she had given him in years. "Yes, Julian," she whispered back, "we really are." But as she stepped off the stage, her resolution wavered. She retreated to the coat check hallway to catch her breath. Leo was there, leaning against the wall, his waiter's jacket discarded. "You look like you're having second thoughts," he said. "Is it worth it, Leo? Becoming the villain to catch one?" Leo stepped closer, his presence grounding, warm. "You're not the villain, Maya. You're the auditor. You're just balancing the books. He's the one who stole the future. You're just taking yours back." The moment was broken by the sound of Julian's voice coming from the VIP lounge around the corner. "Look, I don't care about the honeymoon," Julian was saying to someone, Elena. "Just make sure the London office has the NDA ready for her to sign on Monday morning. I want her moved out of the penthouse by the time I get back from the roadshow. She's served her purpose. I can't have her hanging around my neck once the stock hits $60 a share." Maya's doubt vanished. It didn't just evaporate, it turned into a cold, hard diamond of intent. She turned to Leo. "Can you make the final data leak to be timed to the vows?" Leo smiled, and for the first time it wasn't cynical. It was the smile of a man who was about to watch a kingdom fall. "It's already cued, Maya. All you have to do is walk down that aisle." "I'm not walking," she said, adjusting the lapel of her hidden suit bag. "I'm marching." The morning of the wedding of the century arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. Chicago was cold, a biting wind whipping off the lake. But inside the bridal suite of the Peninsula Hotel, it was a stifling summer of white roses and expensive hairspray. Maya sat motionless as the makeup artist applied a final layer of setting spray. In the corner, the $30,000 Vera Wang gown hung from a custom velvet hanger. It looked like a ghost, a lace and tulle monument to the woman Maya was supposed to be. "You're so calm, Maya," her lead bridesmaid, a socialite named Tinsley who hadn't spoken to Maya in months until the IPO was announced, chirped. "I'd be hyperventilating if I were marrying the man of the year." "I'm exactly where I need to be, Tinsley," Maya said, her eyes fixed on her reflection. She wasn't looking at her makeup. She was looking at the digital watch she'd hidden under her silk robe. 10 o'clock. In 2 hours, the ceremony would begin. In 2 hours and 15 minutes, Julian's world would cease to exist. A soft knock at the door signaled a visitor. Julian's lawyer, a man named Marcus with skin like parchment and eyes that never blinked, stepped inside. He held a silver tray with a single document. "A gift from Mr. Thorne," Marcus said, his voice a dry rasp. He wanted to ensure everything was settled before the ceremony, a gesture of security for your future together. Maya didn't need to read the title to know what it was. the post-nuptial NDA and debt assumption agreement. Julian wasn't just planning to dump her, he was planning to saddle her with the $200,000 wedding bill and a legal muzzle that would prevent her from ever claiming her share of the Thorne Ventures branding rights. "How thoughtful," Maya whispered, her fingers grazing the paper. "Tell Julian I'll give him my answer at the altar." Marcus bowed stiffly and left. The bridesmaids cooed about romantic surprises, but Maya felt a surge of adrenaline so sharp it was almost painful. The last shred of guilt she'd carried, the tiny voice asking if she was taking this too far, was silenced forever. At 11:30 a.m., the suite cleared out. The bridesmaids headed to the church. The photographers were shooed away for private reflection. Maya stood alone in the center of the room. She walked over to the Vera Wang gown. For a moment, she touched the delicate lace. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she reached behind the dress to the garment bag hidden in the shadows of the closet. She unzipped it. The black fabric of the Alexander McQueen power suit shimmered in the dim light. The blazer was sharp-shouldered, the trousers tailored to a razor's edge. It wasn't a wedding dress. It was armor. Her phone vibrated on the vanity. A text from Leo. "The servers are primed. The guest list is synced. Every phone in that cathedral is a ticking bomb. You ready, brand strategist?" Maya picked up her phone and typed back, "Launch the countdown." She stripped off the silk robe and stepped into the suit. As she buttoned the blazer, she felt her heartbeat steady. She wasn't the behind-the-scenes miracle worker anymore. She wasn't the beige paint. She walked to the full-length mirror. She looked powerful. She looked dangerous. She looked like the woman who had built an empire and was now about to burn it down to see what lay beneath the ash. Outside, the black car was waiting. The drive to the Fourth Presbyterian Church felt like a funeral procession. Crowds had gathered behind velvet ropes, paparazzi cameras flashing like strobe lights. The world was watching the golden boy get his prize. Maya stepped out of the car, a long black trench coat pulled tightly over her suit to hide the defiance beneath. The heavy oak doors of the church groaned open, revealing the cavernous flower-filled interior. The scent was overwhelming, thousands of lilies, their fragrance cloying and funereal. Julian stood at the end of the long stone aisle, looking like a god in his midnight blue tuxedo. He was smiling, that perfect, practiced smile that had fooled the world. He caught her eye and gave a small, confident wink. He thought he'd already won. He thought the NDA was as good as signed. The music shifted. The heavy chords of the organ began to swell, shaking the very floorboards beneath Maya's wheat. The wedding coordinator, a frantic woman with a headset, whispered, "Wait, where's your bouquet and your veil? Maya, we need to—" Maya ignored her. She shed the silk robe, letting it fall to the floor like a discarded skin. The coordinator gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A suit? Maya, you can't go out there in a—" "Watch me," Maya said. She stepped into the light of the center aisle. A collective gasp rippled through the pews. The who's who of the tech world, the investors, the socialites, and Julian's godfather, Arthur, all leaned forward. The whispers started immediately, a low hissing sound like a nest of snakes. Julian's smile didn't just fade, it curdled. His eyes widened, darting from Maya's black suit to the empty hands where the lilies should have been. Maya didn't walk, she marched. Her heels clicked against the stone with the rhythm of a firing squad. With every step, she felt the weight of 5 years of silence, 5 years of being the woman behind the man falling away. She reached the altar. Julian leaned in, his voice a frantic, low snarl. "Maya, what the hell are you doing? Where is the dress? You're making a scene. Do you have any idea how much the Times paid for the exclusive photos?" Maya didn't answer him. She didn't even look at him. She stepped past him, moving directly to the mahogany podium where the priest stood. She took the microphone. The feedback shrieked through the vaulted ceiling, silencing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya said, her voice clear, resonant, and utterly terrifying. "Today, I've decided that a secret this big shouldn't be kept any longer. I think it's time everyone saw exactly how this empire was built." She turned then, looking Julian directly in the eye. He was pale now, his hand twitching toward his pocket. "Today," Maya smiled, "I've decided that a secret this big shouldn't be kept any longer. I think it's time everyone saw exactly how this empire was built." She looked up at the balcony, where Leo Sterling sat in the shadows. He raised his tablet. "Check your phones," Maya said. In unison, 600 phones in the cathedral chimed, a digital scream that echoed off the stained glass. The sound was uncanny, a rhythmic digital pulse that drowned out the dying notes of the organ. Hundreds of screens illuminated at once, casting a ghostly blue light onto the faces of Chicago's elite. Julian's hand was already in his pocket, his fingers fumbling for his own device. When he pulled it out, his face went from a panicked flush to a sickly, translucent white. On every screen was a high-resolution dossier titled "The Thorne Foundation, a Study in Fraud." It wasn't just a gossip leak. It was a meticulously indexed library of Julian's darkest secrets. There were the shell company wire transfers Leo had uncovered. There was the original source code for the Clean Water Initiative, timestamped 3 years prior to Julian inventing it. And then there was the video. A large projector screen, intended to show a montage of the couple's journey of love later in the ceremony, flickered to life. Maya had spent the night before rerouting the feed. The church fell into a silence so heavy it felt physical. Julian's voice filled the cavernous space, amplified through the state-of-the-art sound system. "The Great Wall of Boring, just until the wedding. She's the beige paint on the wall. I need her for the IPO, but after that, I'm moving her to a satellite office in London." The footage showed Julian and Elena in the conference room. It wasn't just the infidelity that made the guests gasp. It was the sheer, icy calculation in Julian's eyes as he spoke about the people who had built his life. "Maya," Julian stammered, his hands outstretched in a plea for a grace that no longer existed. This is a deep fake. It's a bitter fabrication. Arthur, you know me. You know my heart." Arthur, the godfather, and the man whose investment Julian had been counting on to save his over-leveraged empire, didn't say a word. He stood up slowly, his face a mask of cold fury. He looked at Maya, gave her a short, respectful nod, and walked out of the row. Like a dam breaking, the rest of the guests followed. The who's who of the tech world didn't want to be caught in the blast radius of a sinking ship. The rustle of silk and the hurried click of heels on stone filled the church as Julian's perfect life emptied out into the cold Chicago afternoon. Julian turned on Maya, his eyes wild, the mask of the golden boy finally shattered to reveal the hollow man beneath. "You've ruined me," he hissed, stepping toward her. "You've destroyed everything I worked for. You're nothing without me, Maya. You're the brand strategist for a ghost." Maya didn't flinch. She stood her ground, the sharp lines of her black suit making her look like a statue of justice against the backdrop of white lilies. "I didn't destroy anything, Julian," she said, her voice low and steady. "I just stopped maintenance. You were a house of cards I spent 5 years propping up. I simply stepped away to see if you could stand on your own." She leaned in closer, her voice a mere whisper that carried more weight than his screams. "By the way, the SEC received the same files 10 minutes ago. I'd save your breath for the depositions." She turned her back on him, the ultimate insult, and walked down the aisle. She didn't look at the empty pews or the discarded programs. She looked toward the heavy oak doors. As she pushed them open, the winter air hit her, sharp and cleansing. The paparazzi were a frenzy of flashes, but Maya ignored them, her head held high. A black SUV sat idling at the curb. Leo Sterling was leaning against the door, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, but a small, satisfied smirk played on his lips. He opened the passenger door for her. "Where to, CEO?" Leo asked. Maya looked back at the church one last time. Julian was standing on the steps, looking small and frantic as his lawyer's phones began to ring incessantly. "To the office, Leo," Maya said, sliding into the leather seat. "I have a new brand to build, and this time I'm putting my own name on the door." 6 months later. The office was a loft in the West Loop, all exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling glass, and the hum of a team that actually enjoyed their work. The sign on the glass door was simple: Vance Strategy Group. Maya stood by the window, a cup of black coffee in her hand. The morning headlines were quiet about Julian Thorne. He had become a footnote, a cautionary tale of the tech bubble. His IPO had crashed, his assets were frozen, and his perfect life had been auctioned off to pay for his mounting legal fees. A knock at her door drew her attention. Leo walked in, looking far more polished than he had at the Rusty Anchor, though he still carried that same honest, gruff edge. He set a file on her desk. "The merger for the new water project is finalized. The original code is back in the right hands. We start the rollout next month." "Good," Maya said, smiling. "It's about time that technology did some actual good." Leo stayed for a moment, his gaze lingering on her. "You look different, Maya. I realized today I haven't seen you wear beige once in 6 months." Maya laughed, a genuine light sound that reached her eyes. She looked at her reflection in the glass, the sharp blazer, the confident set of her shoulders, the woman who was no longer a ghost in her own life. "Beige is a hard color to maintain, Leo. I find that I much prefer the light." Leo smiled and gestured toward the door. "Coffee, as equals this time? I'm buying." Maya tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and stepped out from behind her desk. "I'd like that." She walked out of her office, her heels clicking with a rhythm that no longer sounded like a firing squad. It sounded like a heartbeat. The Thorne Empire was ash, but from that ash, Maya had finally built herself.